Welcome to the Vulnerable Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Almeida. Each week, we'll share the inspiring story of someone who has faced their share of vulnerability and been able to find success and fulfillment. We hope all our stories will help you find the strength within yourself to live the life you want and find success of your own. Helen Keller said, "Security is mostly a superstition. It does not exist in nature, nor do the children of men as a whole experience it. Avoiding danger is no safer in the long run than outright exposure. Life is either a daring adventure or nothing." This is episode 12 of the Vulnerable Podcast with Joze Piranian. Growing up wasn't easy by any means for this man. At a young age, he would end up with a stutter that in many ways kept him quiet for years. From being extremely socially anxious in public settings, to even avoiding contact with his family at times. Even after learning techniques in England to help him control his speech impediment, it would still be years before he'd find the courage to speak openly. In university, he actually asked to be exempt from any presentations in front of his classmates. But then something inside of him made him decide that he needed to begin facing his fears, and maybe this is where he'd find the power to move forward. Not willing to play small, he decided to try another technique he was taught and go out in public to find and speak to 100 complete strangers. He received everything from strangers who embraced him and shared their stories too, to people who either laughed at him or simply turned and walked away. Through it all, it's given him the strength to try new things and overcome what was once the thing that held him back the most. Now he's an accomplished public speaker, speaking on the TEDx stage, and a stand-up comedian who's performed internationally. Instead of letting people bring him down, he uses his uniqueness to lift others up, and makes a joke out of the stutter that once kept him from speaking at all. It's not only inspiring to hear his story, but heartwarming as well, because it truly shows us that even when we are so close to giving up, we have the ability to make a drastic change by facing our fears to build the life of our dreams. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to get vulnerable with Joze Piranian. Hey, Joze, thank you for coming on the Vulnerable Podcast. I am really excited to have you on. I've been following you for probably a little over a year now, and I will say that your story is definitely one that inspires me, and I'm sure many other people. You've done a lot of things that I'm sure a lot of people told you couldn't do, or that even maybe yourself felt that you weren't going to be able to do. And it's, like I said, it's been completely inspiring for me to see your journey and see all the interesting and amazing things that you're doing. So again, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me and for the kind words. For the listeners, I will briefly mention that your internet is fine. I'm the one who has a stutter.
I was kind of hoping that you'd start with a joke, and so that worked out perfectly. I appreciate that. So the first question I ask every guest when they come on is, what is your definition of vulnerability?
My definition of vulnerability is being okay with not looking perfect, accepting imperfection, accepting to not fulfill the traditional definition of cool or of normal.
That's a good one. And what's interesting to me is literally every episode that I've had so far, not one person has a similar definition. Everybody's is different. So I appreciate that. So what would you say your earliest memory of facing vulnerability or some sort of struggle in your life? What would your earliest memory of that be?
I would say for me, ever since I've stuttered, which I'm told intensified in my teenage years, it every time I spoke was essentially an instance of vulnerability. And for most of my life, it was what I would call negative vulnerability. Be- because I did not own it, because I was ashamed of it, because I allowed my stutter, or in broader terms, because I allowed me being different to prevent me from expressing myself. I always experienced vulnerability, and two, this vulnerability always affected me negatively.
So, I mean, I know you've sort of talked about, if anybody's been following your story, that you ended up discovering some breathing practices to help you. Is that the only thing that helped you overcome this vulnerability, or was there other things that helped you overcome this vulnerability in your life?
That's a very interesting question, Brian, because I initially learned this breathing technique in 2007 on a speech course in the UK, but it took me years to be in the right state of mind that allowed me to openly ex- express myself. Because even though I had learned an effective technique to speak, I was still going to sound unusual. And that was the psychological barrier that I faced years after learning it. I had the occasional week or month of progress, but I would say it was only about 3 years ago that things started to change in a very significant manner.
So, obviously, going through this, it wasn't easy. And like you said, it was sort of negative vulnerability more than anything else. But what new strength would you say you found in yourself from going through this? Because you did say over the last 3 years, there's been a significant change. So what new strength caused that significant change, I guess?
I would say a quick headline before getting into more details is transition from negative vulnerability to positive vulnerability, in that something that used to hold me back in every way possible turned into the source that drives me, as well as the source that, as well as something that makes me very aware of the adversity and challenges that other people might face. So I would say it is serving me in in probably in three different ways. One, it drives me. I'll give you an example of how it drives me. I was at the Mark Manson book signing a few months ago, and at some point at the end, he asks who has a question, and my heart starts to beat extremely rapidly when he asked who has a question. And I understood that, oh wow, it feels like I am absolutely terrified of the idea of having to put my hand up in front of hundreds of people, and I have to turn an uncomfortable situation into a comfortable one. So I took that fear as an indication of this must be something that I have to do. Whereas in the past, that same fear would be one that make me avoid or escape. And in fact, avoiding and escaping was how I spent most of my life for anything related to people and speaking. It's a bit like the fight or the fight or flight. Is it is it is it the is it the flight or fight or fight or flight? The
Yeah.
fight or flight.
It's
Yes.
yeah, yeah, the psychologists, I guess, bring it back to, we have from way back, in our beginnings of becoming humans, that we have a flight or fight mentality, which is either we go at it full force or we run.
Yeah. Yes. That's exactly it. Most of my life, flight was my default mechanism. It was like, okay, I have to deal with speaking to this person or in front of a group. I better escape. Whereas today, when I feel that same fear, it serves as a drive to do that thing that appears to be terrifying. That's the first of the three. The second way is that it makes me extremely aware of the challenges and adversity that other people face, as well as extremely empathetic to other paths of adversity. And three, I suppose when other people see me combining vulnerability with courage, that might also have a positive effect in terms of in indirectly giving them some strength to accept their own imperfections or to face their own fears. So I would say those are the three ways that come to mind right now.
Yeah, no, it sounds to me like, and obviously there's lots to take from that, but it sounds to me that self-awareness became a big part of, this sort of journey that you're on, because for you to be able to be there in that situation with the Mark Manson book launch or whatever it was that you're at, for you to sort of know that feeling of, your heart beating out of your chest and the nerves that you were feeling, to know that was sort of telling you, I got to do this. And a lot of people wouldn't see it that way. I think a lot of people would probably do what you said you would have done earlier in life, which is just run the other way and just
Yeah,
try and escape. So, I mean, it sounds like you've got a lot more self-awareness nowadays.
yeah, and to be honest, it's also be, because I've noticed over the past 2 3 years that when I do something that scares me, once I have done it, it feels extremely good. and it also makes other challenges in my life seem a lot more accessible as a result of having done something super scary. So I'll give you an example. After I had asked that question at the Mark Manson event, I shared a, a bit about my journey at the event, and after the event was over, uh, I had a lot of conversations with people in the audience who had heard me speak and who were interested in chatting some more. And I realized that it it did not feel challenging or uncomfortable at all to have spoken to maybe 30, 40 people after the event, thanks to having done something a lot scarier. It made the task of speaking to people socially seem a lot more accessible. So it's almost like when we confront a big fear, that confidence can spill over into other areas of our lives.
I'm kind of hoping that that's how I'm going to feel after skydiving, because I have a big fear of heights, and one of the next things that I want to do is go skydiving. So I'm hoping that that's the result that I get, is that it gives me a little more confidence in maybe other areas. And
Amazing.
but that's
That's, yeah.
incredible.
When are you going?
I haven't got a date yet. I got some friends that are that just went recently, and I wasn't able to join them. It was the May 2-4 long weekend, and I had other plans that weekend. But they're planning on doing a second round, so I'm just going to try and plan with them, and at least that way I'm not doing it alone, and I'm doing it with some people that I know. But it's incredible to me that like just hearing you tell that story, the insight that you grabbed from that, and even the insight that I'm grabbing from it, where facing such a big fear is, makes every other little fear seem like nothing. I mean, I thought, you were going to say you maybe spoke to 3 or 4 other people after asking that question, but 30 or 40 is a whole nother story. And so, it's amazing how you went from like, I can't ask this question in front of 100 people to now I'm going to speak to almost half the room afterwards. So, kudos to you for that. So
Thank you.
no problem. So this next question, I always find it hard to sort of put it into a question, because I think every person defines vulnerability and struggle and everything in their life differently. But would you say that you faced a lot of vulnerability, a little vulnerability, a moderate amount of vulnerability? Like, how would you define what you faced throughout your life? And then if you don't mind, is there a few more stories of vulnerability that you could share with the listeners?
Absolutely. I would say I faced my answer would be a lot of vulnerability, because it's not the only way I could hide my vulnerability would be to not speak, which in itself was a different type of vulnerability. And then when I did speak, I automatically got reactions from people. So even up to this day, every time that I open my mouth in the world, if I'm talking to new people, there's always this initial reaction from people. It's a reaction of surprise, sometimes discomfort, sometimes confusion. So this happens every time I speak to someone. So I always deal with this feeling of discomfort as a result of being different. What has changed, however, is how I manage it. So I today I always acknowledge the fact that I have a stutter. When I meet someone new, we're talking, the initial reaction of theirs is like, huh? They're a bit confused. Every person reacts to it differently. Some will look uncomfortable. Some will look confused. Some people will make a pretty direct comment about it before they know what's happening. So an example is I was at an event last night, for example, and I was asked what my name was, and I said, Joze. And then one person in front of the group says, oh, did you forget your name? That's a comment I hear pretty often. And in the past, that comment might have really affected me, and I would have used this as a pretext to not speak to anyone the rest of the night or the rest of the week or the rest of the month, who knows. But now that same comment that in the moment does make me look bad in front of other people, this is not a comment that would make you look good. So it does involve vulnerability, and it's about how I handle it, which has changed. So now when this happens, I'll laugh it off. I'll say, oh no, I just have a stutter. And it sounds super simple now, but it took me 2.5 decades maybe to have developed the mental strength to be completely okay with saying something like this and not allowing it to make me feel inadequate.
No, I mean, and I can just when you said that, like, I can't. It seems I'm even having a hard time putting words to it, but like, it amazes me in some ways the ignorance of some people, because I mean, we all have our own struggles, we all have our own issues, and it seems it's crazy to me. And I mean, maybe I've been one of those people in the past. I don't know, like, but the point is like, how are we not able to accept each other more openly and more freely? It sort of amazes me in today's world, because again, there's so much adversity, there's so much difference between all of us, but at the end of the day, we're all human beings. I mean, I not to compare the situations, but like, I see it all the time where I work at a factory right now, as sort of my way to make money while I'm doing these things like building on my podcast and everything. And I see the way that different people from different cultures and things treat each other. And it amazes me, because like I just said, we're all human beings. Like, sure, we have differences, but at the end of the day, we all have red blood. We all, walk the same, talk the same for the most part. Like, so it just amazes me that somebody has, I guess, and I don't know a better word to put it other than, like I said, the ignorance to make that sort
Yeah.
of comment.
And to be honest, I used to judge people for reacting this way. Now I changed my perspective on it, and I simply perceive those reactions as nervousness put into words. When someone isn't sure what's happening, when something is unusual, they might try to deal with the uncertainty with a comment with a comment like this one. I At this point in my life, I always give people the benefit of the doubt. I will bring up the fact that I stutter. And if even after I bring it up, someone is not being nice, then I definitely have no interest in continuing the conversation or establishing a relationship with that person. But there are some people who initially had a strong reaction to me that became friends eventually. So I I do give people the benefit of the doubt, also recognizing that if I did not stutter and I met someone who stuttered, I have no idea how my initial reaction would have been. I might have been uncomfortable first as I was trying to figure out why is this person sounding this way. But when I have the answer, then obviously I would have been expected to be like, oh, okay, and then just act normal.
For me, what just came to mind is what you talked about early on in the episode, which is empathy. And to me, that is probably one of the greatest examples of empathy I've ever heard, because for you to be able to sort of sit back and go, okay, well, if I wasn't the one stuttering, how would I react? That's empathy 101 right there. That's you just knowing that like I may have this difference, but I also don't know what it's like to live without it. So I have to see it from both sides. So again, kudos to you for doing that. One other story that I've heard you share before that I think is interesting is when you talk about how talking to people in general was something that you avoided for a long time, but then how you sort of worked through that by just talking to pretty much anyone. Would you mind touching on that a bit?
Uh, Absolutely. So in my second year of university, the fear was so high that I asked my professors to exempt me from all of my presentations. So that's in terms of public speaking. Socially, I also would avoid speaking and people as much as I could. One story I will share before I discuss the challenge I gave myself was I I had this big family gathering a few years back, and I was so terrified by the idea of having to go and be asked questions and then get stuck on my words and then feel so small as a result. I was so afraid of that idea, which ironically everyone else in the family was probably super excited about this reunion, to catch up with one another. I knew I had to get out of it somehow. So I was still living at home. I was in my late teenage years. I pretended to have a cold. I pretended to cough just to convince my parents that I could not go. So my efforts in, and this is the least extreme example. Some are too embarrassing to share. I would say though that my entire life revolved around trying to avoid people and speaking. I was engineering avoidance 24/7. So then the exercise, the challenge I started doing, which I had initially learned on the speech course I did for stuttering in England, and then I really started realizing that this exercise was extremely powerful and that this was going to be the thing that gets me out of my adversity. Every week I started going outside or to the mall, and I would speak to 100 complete strangers. I would typically ask them for directions, or sometimes I would explain what I'm doing right away. So I would say, "Excuse me, I have a stutter, and today I'm just challenging myself by introducing myself to as many complete strangers as I can. Hi, my name is Joze. Thank you." So this exercise was essentially me facing extreme discomfort again and again and again. And over the years, I must have talked to more than tens of thousands of complete strangers, and it changed my life more than anything else.
See, and this is where at the beginning of the episode, I said, like, you've inspired me, and that to me is probably one of the most inspiring things I've heard in a long time. Because again, you did something that I don't think 90% of us even think about doing, and we don't have, like myself, I don't have any speech issues, but I would never walk up to 100 strangers. And at the same time, there's part of me that says maybe it's something I should be doing, because I'm sure that aside from that challenge helping you sort of work through your speech challenges, you probably also learned quite a bit. I can only imagine that some people were probably very open and shared stories, or and some conversations that came from that were probably interesting to have. So again, just amazing that you decided to take that leap and to do that. And like I said, I think that one thing that all of us can learn from that is to maybe talk to strangers more, because we, in listening to a lot of podcasts and a lot of the reading I've been doing recently, it stands out to me more and more how attached we are to our devices and to technology, and how little we're actually communicating as human beings. And I've even seen it change in my own life, and trying to communicate better with, like, my wife, or even at work trying to communicate with people more often, rather than just, putting my head down and doing a job, trying to get to know my coworkers, or, just communicating with them in some shape or form. So,
Yeah.
again, it's, there's a real big lesson to be learned there.
Mm. First of all, I'll say, if you ever want to join me on this exercise, I still do it once every week. So you can let me know, and you can tag along and even do some yourself. In terms of this second thing you said, yeah, I learned a lot about people through this weekly challenge. So one interesting insight was that sometimes the people that you expect to be rude or to be aggressive are the nicest, and the people you expect to be the nicest will react negatively. That's one thing I like. For example, I remember I had seen this group of people with a punk rock vibe, with a lot of tats and piercings. And my first thought was, when I saw the group, I did start feeling some discomfort, like, I feel like I should face that discomfort and go approach that big group. And I did it, and then they turned out to be super nice and very supportive, and like, wow, like they were like, right on, man, that's super awesome that you're doing this. And then on on another day, I recall having asked a question to these 2, 3 people that seemed very nice, and they walked away mid-sentence as I was stuck on a word. So you really get all types of reactions, but here's the interesting thing, is that both positive and negative reactions have affected me very positively. The positive ones are always good for encouragement and to feel support and good vibes and so on. I would say negative ones, by exposing myself to the worst case scenarios, which have included people laughing at me, especially if I'm approaching, for example, a younger group, a group of students, a group of teenage guys, for example, and I'm asking them for directions. Their first reaction naturally to something unusual or weird is laughing. So, and I realized that even though in the moment it feels really uncomfortable, once the situation is over, I feel a certain sense of calm and of oh, almost this feeling of invincibility, thanks to having gone through something really uncomfortable. Imagine doing that 100 times. You'll have to tag along one time And I'm sure that you will get a boost in social confidence from the exercise, even though you do not stutter yourself.
No, I would love to, and I can only imagine that you're right about that. I mean, I can be fully honest and say that when I go to networking events, even where I may even know some people, I still find it takes a little bit of time to warm up because there's still that little unease of like, well, how do I start the conversation? What am I going to talk about? What if that person doesn't find me interesting? Whatever it might be, there's those mental thoughts that happen. So I can only see how this would help you, push past a lot of that, because you're going up to, again, complete strangers. So I think that, there's, again, you've probably gone over this a bit throughout the episode and throughout the interview. But how would you say that all of this, if you were to culminate it all into like, some sort of lesson, how would you say all of it has helped you get to where you are now in terms of a speaker, comedian? Like how has all of these different things helped you get there?
Mm. So I would say accepting that I am different was a crucial step on my journey. Is is especially as I've gone through my stand-up comedy, when I joke about having a stutter, this allows me to gain control over the narrative, over the situation. That's one aspect of it. The second aspect is changing my relationship to fear, or with fear. In the past, fear might have been perceived as a roadblock by myself, as a wall. What, what, whereas nowadays, I perceive it more as a trampoline that propels me into action. The fear is still present, even though I've done hundreds of both stand-up performances and speaking engagements at conferences, companies, schools. The fear is always present, but it's just a different way of looking at it. I'll use I, a more light-hearted sentence to describe how I feel when I feel this fear before speaking, before performing. I'm like, okay, it's showtime. That's the attitude that I would say has changed quite dramatically over the past 30-something years.
So at this point in your life, with the success that you're seeing as a stand-up comedian and as a speaker, would you say that you found success and fulfillment in your life, or would you say that you're still on your journey towards that?
I would say it's an ongoing journey. I I still go through phases. If I don't actively force myself to do this exercise, for example, of talking to 100 strangers a week, the social anxiety of my past that is deeply rooted in how I lived most of my life, it seems to creep back up. That's what one thing. And if I don't work on my stutter constantly through my breathing technique and through other types of things I do to practice and maintain it, the stuttering gradually goes back to being more severe. So it's really an ongoing journey. I would say I've had a lot of instances of success and fulfillment, but I don't see those as, I see those as milestones. I don't see those as an endpoint. And I'm driven, I'm driven to continuously add more instances of success and fulfillment to my journey. And fulfillment can mean a lot of things. It it can mean I'm so proud of myself for having conquered a fear, but it can also mean I'm so fulfilled because I received an amazing message from someone who saw my talk and shared how it affected them in a positive way. Some of the most fulfilling moments of my life were in fact messages I've received from people. There's one that I saved on my desktop and I look at once in a while. This man reached out to me after watching, I believe, my video on Goldcast. He reached out to me and said said that something about my message made him want to tackle his biggest fear, which was that this man is a recovering alcoholic and drug addict, and his relationship with his wife and kids obviously had suffered dramatically over the years because of his addictions. And he said, and I always get emotional when I think about this, he said something about your message made me want to be a better husband and a better father. And when I had read this, I was speechless for just for a whole minute, just being like, wow, I cannot believe that by sharing my vulnerability, by sharing my journey, that this person was able to get this takeaway or this impact from it. So that was definitely one of the most fulfilling moments of my life.
No, I literally had goosebumps, like probably from my toes to my head when you started to tell that story, because that is, because you don't know, and I've said, before on previous episodes, that for me, this podcast and what I'm trying to do with it, all I hope is that each episode impacts one person. I'm not trying to change the world. I'm not trying to, obviously I'd love to impact millions, right? But the goal for me is to impact one person, and to see that you had that much of an impact on somebody by sharing your story, I can only imagine must be pretty fulfilling. So again, it just goes to show that being vulnerable isn't necessarily about being weak or anything like that. It's more about, pushing through and being able to, make an impact essentially. So again, a great story. These have all been great, and I'm sure they're going to help a lot of people. So I'm down to my last couple questions. One of the last ones. Um, there's a lot of takeaways that people can get from this episode. If they were to sit down and really listen to it and take a bunch of notes, I'm sure there's, at least 10 takeaways that they could come out with. But what I'd ask you right now is if you could give people 3 key takeaways that they can take away from your journey, your experiences, to help them, move through their own struggles, their own vulnerabilities, what would those 3 takeaways be?
Own what makes you unique. Own what makes you different, basically. Whatever that thing is for you. Accept that fear will always be there, and therefore it's illogical to wait for it to magically go away before you take the action that you want to take deep down. Third message would be when you repeatedly face your fears, it transforms the way you live your life, and your life can truly become sweeter than what you could have ever imagined. Because if I tell my teenage self that the teenager, and in fact the university student who was asking his professors to exempt him from presentations, if I told him that he would be performing stand-up comedy and speaking professionally, there's no way in hell he would have believed me. So when we repeatedly face fears and discomfort, we can transform our lives beyond recognition. And the way that we live today versus the way that we can live are so different. It's hard for someone to even imagine how the quality of life that can be reached once fears are repeatedly confronted.
Solid 3, solid 3, definitely. And again, like I said, there's so many takeaways from this episode, but those 3 definitely, I think, will help a lot of people overcoming their fears and pushing forward. I mean, for myself, getting outside my comfort zone a couple of years ago after I got let go from my job led to a lot of different things happening in my life, this podcast included. So I can definitely see how that can definitely help people, including myself and many others listening. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Last thing isn't so.
And before the next thing, I think what you just shared right now is a good illustration that anything that feels uncomfortable might indirectly lead to some type of growth. it it can go two ways. That same thing might might either paralyze someone or might skyrocket their potential. And we are in control of how we choose to live this adversity.
No, definitely, definitely. So the last thing isn't so much a question, but more of an opportunity that I like to give all my guests for them to promote themselves and anything that they're doing, anything that they want to put out into the world. Whether it's just sharing your social handles, maybe upcoming performances, whatever it might be. So the floor is yours. Share away.
Oh, awesome. In terms of up, upcoming events and such, I will. It's easier if I give people my Instagram handle and then announce those anyway on Instagram. So it's at Yesway Joze. Joze is with a Z.
Awesome. Yeah. And I'll share your social handle, LinkedIn,
Yes, as well.
Facebook and Instagram as well. But Instagram, I know, is definitely, from what I've seen from following you, is where you seem to be most active. So I'll make a point. And I believe you also have your website where people can look at some of your past speaking gigs and other things that are going on with you. I even know that you had an ebook on there that you're sharing. And
Yes.
I've
So yes, thank you for reminding me of that. On my website, there's a free ebook that people can get by clicking on the logo that says free ebook.
Awesome. Definitely. All right, man. Well, again, this has been I've done about, I think that you're maybe 12 or 13. I can't remember, but I've done about a dozen episodes now, and I have to say, this one is, I think, one of my favorites so far, because I just from knowing you over the past couple of years, like I said at the beginning of the episode, your story and the things that you've managed to push through and everything just inspires me a lot. Because myself, I want to become a speaker as well, and I've had my own negative self-talk and things that I've had to overcome over the last couple of years, which in my opinion are nothing compared to the struggles and vulnerabilities that you face. But just having this conversation with you today, learning a little bit more about your story and going a little bit deeper with you, it just continues to inspire me, man. So thank you for
Thank
coming on.
you. And by the way, I would I, I would never I would never compare adverse ad, 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 adversities in the sense that everyone has their own journey, their own story, and even though in my case it might be a lot more visible because it's a stutter, I would never use the fact that the stutter is visible as justification that the adversity that other people are facing is lesser. I believe we we're all in this together on this planet, on this weird on, on this weird, difficult and beautiful journey called life. And it's the same principles I think apply to everyone. The three things I had said earlier, they can apply to everyone. I think facing fears, facing discomfort, repeatedly doing the things that we don't want that we don't want to do because they're scary. Those are things that that regardless of what the adversity is, the best way out is through.
Strong way to end it, my friend. Again, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. I'm definitely going to take you up on that, going out there and talking to strangers at some point when I can find the time that both works for both of us. And again, I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate your friendship and the constant inspiration, man.
Thank you for having me on. It was a real pleasure, and yes, we'll definitely speak, and we'll have you tag along on one of my speaking challenges.
Awesome. Take care, man.
Have a good one.
You too. Thank you for listening to the Vulnerable Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. It helps get the word out and means more than you know. You can also follow the podcast on Instagram at vulnerable.podcast or on Facebook and LinkedIn by searching Vulnerable Podcast. You can also follow me on Instagram at the B.E. Almeida. That's the BEALMEIDA, or by searching my name on Facebook and LinkedIn. If you know anyone with a great story of going from struggle to success, please let me know, as I would love to interview them for the show. I appreciate you taking the time to listen, and see you next week.